Good morning and welcome to the first 2024 episode of Mock It Like It's Hot. New day, new time, same ugly face, but that's all right. We have a great draft today. We are jumping into a Superflex Dynasty startup mock. We're only going to do 15 rounds. Obviously, startups take a lot longer than that, but for this show, we're going to do 15 rounds. We're going to talk some free agency, and you know what? The draft is full. Let's get into it. That's right. I even got an intro video for this year. We are coming up in the world. Welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot. I am your host, Ryan Weisse. With me, as always, Austin Amandolia. Austin, who now covers the Carolina Panthers. You're going to be kicking the knowledge this week. I can feel it, Austin.
Yeah, it's kind of weird to be mock drafting right now. I have a fantasy baseball draft on Tuesday night, so my brain's been caught up in that world and then spring training shenanigans. So turning it back to the football, keeping up with all the free agency news and ready to talk about it.
Yeah, I noticed when I was creating the schedule, we are 2 weeks earlier than we were last year. I blame our good buddy Joel Worth, who had me host the Dynasty show last week, where he did a mock draft show. Got me way too excited for this. So we're 2 weeks early, but that doesn't matter. It's time to do some mock draft and trying to see what's going on. And with us this week, first time on Mock It Like It's Hot, but if you followed Club Fantasy for any period of time, big friend of the show, Mike Mattis, Fantasy Mike. Mike, welcome.
Hey, what's going on, Ryan? It's good to be back. Been out of the content creation game for a bit. Started in this game a few years ago with Ball Blast Football, the wonderful, Kate and Michelle Majuk, and, you and Josh and everybody at Club Fantasy has always treated me well too. So glad to be back at it. I'm excited.
Yeah, one of the things we love about this show, now don't take this the wrong way at all. Mike knows his shit, but we don't just need to have content creators on this show. Everybody, for the most part, does mock drafts, and everybody feels some way about mock drafts. And there's as much to learn from someone who puts out content every day as there is to someone who just plays fantasy football. And I play in at least, I think, 2 leagues with Mike now, definitely one. And Mike knows his shit, let me tell you, and a master of the trade. And as I bring that up, let me go ahead and bring up the draft board. As I mentioned, we are going to do a Superflex mock this week, 10-team Dynasty. And one of the things I always point out when we are doing a Dynasty mock is one thing you cannot do in a mock draft is trade picks. And I play in enough drafts with Austin and Mike to know that they trade picks when we do these startup drafts. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Let me get this draft started first. Shia LaBeouf is on the clock. The real Shia, I imagine. Shia LaBeouf's on the clock. But guys, let's get started. Let's start with what I just brought up. Trades in startups. Austin, I've heard you talk about this for 3 years now. I'm going to let Mike get us started. Mike, how do you approach trades in startups? Are you someone who's looking to move up, move back? Do you take each trade individually? You don't come in with a strategy? How do you feel about it?
Well, I think it's tough to take a cookie cutter approach to anything in fantasy. You always got to have an open mind and kind of look at your situation, know your league mates. That's very important as well. Know kind of some of their strategies and what they like to do. But, you just want to get value. So you don't want to trade the 101 just to get an extra pick just because you can. But really, if there's good value there, just go for it. If you're back at the end of the first round, you have a chance to get 2 pretty elite talents right there. But when you're toward the top of the draft, most of the time you're waiting another 20 or so picks until you're getting that second guy. So if you want to kind of try to even out your eliteness at the top of your roster, usually when I'm more toward the top of the draft, I look for a trade. But again, it's got to be there. You don't want to force it at all.
All right. Mike, you are on the clock. I'm going to interrupt you because I want to make sure you get your pick in. I'll do that sometimes throughout the draft, just cut you guys off. But let's also be clear, an auto pick in a mock draft, not the worst thing in the entire world. So we'll make do and make fun of you for it. One thing I do want to get into is just draft settings and a little bit about the show if you guys have never watched the show before. So as I mentioned, it is a 10-team Superflex draft, but we added third round reversal. The draft show I did last week, we did not put in third round reversal, got flamed for it on Twitter. And I said, different drafts for different people. Let's go ahead and throw it in this one. And I'll give you guys a little bit time to talk about that. At the end of the show, Austin and Mike will recap their drafts. They will talk about if they had any strategies, and I will designate what I thought was the worst pick of the draft. It's all in good fun. I'm going to make fun of you. Again, it's a mock. We do not rate and review every team. That is not the goal with this show. The goal is to practice drafting, try out some strategies, and kind of see where players' value is and how it's going to change. So we're going to discuss interesting picks as they happen. And then I do want to just go ahead and give a shout out to those who are drafting with us. From the 1, we have a player named Shia LaBeouf. Based Brody is at 2. Chris Lucier is at 3.
Austin, my wonderful nephew, by the way.
Oh, there we go. Did I pronounce the name right? I made it French. I said
Lucia, yes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Austin at 4, Ryan M at 5, Mike is picking at 6, El Jefe at 7, Gator J, friend of the show and Club Fantasy content contributor, is at 8. Astro Dabber, who we gave a lot of shit last week, is at 9, and Gator Raiders is currently picking at 10. Astro Dabber was such a nice character last week. We did not care for his team or her team, I don't know. But I was chatting with them in the draft chat today, and I told him, I can't promise we're going to be any nicer, but my co-hosts are nicer this week. But he said he can't promise to make us any happier this week either. So it's a give and a take when it comes to these mock drafts. Guys, as I mentioned, I wanted to get started with actually, Austin, I apologize. Go ahead and talk about your strategy when it comes into trading with these dynasty startups.
Well, I think Mike said it really well. It's really hard to take a cookie cutter approach to this. In general, I'm usually less aggressive on the trades. I just tend to let the draft fall to me and take the players that I like the most. It's probably why I'm bad at dynasty startups, frankly. But I tend to be more of a trade down person than a trade up person. I like getting the value when people are feeling desperate to get up and pick their player. Although I'm a weird guy where I'll find some random player that I love in like the 32nd round of a startup and want to draft up to get them. So it just kind of depends on the situation. I do know Joe Wirth has a really good approach that I like about this, where he's talked about like just trade up, do what you can to get 2 picks in the first round, because then you can get both of your quarterbacks in that Superflex league and you're good to go. I like that as a approach to take, particularly depending on where you're starting. So that's kind of my generic approach to drafting.
I'm going to give a shout out to another friend of the show, Kevin Coleman, who, first of all, is this the first time we've ever seen Kevin Coleman's real face? I thought he was a cartoon for all these years. But new profile picture for Kevin, looking good. Happy to see Mike. Tells Mike who to draft, and Mike listens. That's the way we like to see it go. Mike is a man of the people when it comes to mock drafting on Mock It Like It's Hot. Guys, free agency started this week, and it started with a bang. Lots of players moving, running backs getting deals that we did not expect to see from running backs. But I want to start with the quarterback position. And Austin, I want to start with your Atlanta Falcons, and I'll let you get started here. Kirk Cousins, the new quarterback of the Atlanta Falcons, 35 years old, is what makes this interesting to me. So talk about what the signing of Cousins means for you, the Falcons, but more importantly, the dynasty value of Kirk, and maybe some of those ancillary pieces, Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts moving forward.
Yeah. So as a Falcons fan, I'm having to be a little bit careful about my excitement. This is explicitly why I don't write about the Falcons, is because there's too much emotional investment there. I can't think clearly with them, because part of me wants to be very excited about this deal. We have a real quarterback who can throw the ball to Kyle Pitts and Drake London, and a quarterback that kills it at play action, which means Bijan Robinson will have a great person under center to keep this offense going forward. From a dynasty perspective, I don't have a ton of interest in Kirk Cousins. I think if you're taking that win now approach, he's a perfectly fine QB2 to have on your roster. I'm not too worried about him coming off of the Achilles injury. They signed him to a 4-year contract. That's probably in reality a 3-year contract. So I think he's a fine person to get if you're taking the win now approach. I think it does really boost the value of Kyle Pitts and Drake London in particular. Bijan Robinson, like, his value is already, like, as you can see in this draft, RB1. That's it. That's going to be fine. But Drake London and Kyle Pitts, they'd kind of fallen down. I think they can move further up. People forget we already have a 1,000-yard season out of Kyle Pitts. We know that he can do it. He's been dealing with injury and bad quarterback play the past 2 seasons. There's a new coaching system, new offensive scheme, and a new quarterback in Atlanta. Kyle Pitts should be more of a priority than what he has been recently in Dynasty.
Yeah. One of the dangers of the 3rd round reversal is Gator Raiders may not have realized the pick was coming back to him as quickly and just auto pick. So Gator Raiders, if you happen to be watching, make sure you turn auto back off and
I got sniped twice in a row.
I say enjoy your pick of Christian McCaffrey.
I was hoping he called me there. I was really hoping he called me at 3-5.
Well, it was the auto pick, so we learn absolutely nothing. That's just the way it goes sometimes, Mike. Mike, looking at this team, Austin, said it obviously boosts up the value of Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, though Bijan couldn't really get boosted up too much higher. I want to look. Cousins is 35 years old. And as Austin mentioned, it's a 3-year deal more than likely. So for the next 3 years, and you tell people to play Dynasty in a 3-year window, Do we really believe Kirk Cousins is going to be effective through 38 years old and it should, in fact, boost the value of London and Pitts? Or with this news cycle, are they sell-high candidates?
I mean, I think that London and Pitts are both buys right now. I mean, anything is better than what they've had in the past. Anything is better than what they had, especially somebody like Cousins who was slinging it all over the place before he got hurt last year. So yeah, Drake London and Kyle Pitts are both buys. There's no question. More so Drake London. As far as Cousins himself, if you're a contender, and you want to throw maybe like a high second or something at him, I think it's worth it. I think he is going to put up, probably a year or two, some really good production. If you're a little far off from a championship and you don't really have that window to go all in, then no, I don't think he's a great option, because you're right. Very few people are the great Tom Brady that can last that long. Yeah. But one guy I also like on that offense too, and I don't want to jump the gun here, but a sneaky guy could be like a Darnell Mooney, who's someone I was really, really waiting to see where he went in free agency. This is a guy who had almost 140 targets in his second year and 1,500 air yards. I mean, you look at some of his stats coming out of college, he was an over 80% percentile and breakout age and college dominator and target share. Again, I wouldn't spend too much, but if you're looking at a late second, early third, and someone wants to give up on Darnell Mooney, I think that's a great guy. So it's not even so much that Cousins is the buy, but everyone else in that offense certainly is no question about it.
Absolutely love that. Darnell Mooney was a darling of the fantasy community and went to the outhouse very quickly. And that offense, it cannot be understated how bad that offense was for him in Chicago. And now we are dealing with something very different. As Austin pointed out, Cousins a master of the play action, and that's going to give Darnell Mooney time to get open. I think it's going to play out really well. Kevin brings up an interesting point, nothing to do with fantasy football, but he says, as a 35-year-old man, 35 is the new 29. And it is always hilarious to me. I am 42 years old. I'm older at soul than 42. Let me be very clear about that. When I have to refer to these players as old at 35 years old, and then when we get into running backs and I have to start talking about, the worry about their 29-year-old bodies is hilarious to me. But that's one of the shortfalls of being a fantasy football host. Now, what I found interesting when I was doing my own rankings is 35 years old for Kirk Cousins, and the world is his oyster. But my goodness, nobody gives a shit that 35-year-old Russell Wilson signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers on a very team-friendly deal. And I know Russ has not played up to Cousins' standard recently, Mike, but my question is, when we look at Russ, does he give that same kind of boost, especially now with Kenny Pickett out of town? It's really much looking like Russell Wilson's team. Does he give that same kind of boost to George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth to an extent?
If Freiermuth, I mean, we'll see. Russell Wilson is not what he once was, but I certainly don't think he's as bad as everyone wants to make him out to be. It was really weird what happened in Denver, and how that just kind of fell apart. Sorry, I was picking there. But speaking of picking, the guy I'm interested in is George Pickens, because, even though Arthur Smith is there, it gives you a bit of hesitation. He's the type of receiver that Russell Wilson thrives with. Everyone wants to crap all over, Cortland Sutton all the time now, it seems. But do you know how many touchdowns that man had last year? Even in such a bad year, Cortland Sutton put up a lot of points. And, Chris is probably laughing right now, because in my league last year, I had a lot of receiver depth and I was trying to move Sutton and nobody wanted him. I ended up moving him for a 4th-round pick because I had to make a move. There was a reason for it. I had to get pooped on my roster off my taxi. But anyway, so I do think that it helps somebody like Pickens. As far as the rest of the offense, it also rests on Arthur Smith too. They've got a great running back tandem. Those two guys are going to get their touches. So do I think that he's going to do what Kirk Cousins does? No, because he's not going to have the opportunity to do so. So you have to look at that too. It's not so much the player, but the scheme and the person running the offense.
Austin, you are very well aware that George Pickens made it to my shit list throughout last year. And essentially, with the hit or miss style of his game, I was likening him to Gabe Davis. However, coming into the year, and Mike, you'll love this, we did shows with Kate Majuk, who was all about George Pickens and talked me into buying in. So I have a ton of George Pickens on rosters. And before the preseason, the fantasy free agency started, I was ready to trade him everywhere and offering him for not extreme prices. Now that he's alone with Russell Wilson, Austin, I'm turning back on George Pickens, and I want him on my team again. He's driving me absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think George Pickens is a very interesting player right now because of the Russell Wilson addition. Like, that's the type of receiver Wilson wants to throw the ball to. He wants that downfield threat that's going to be working outside of the hash marks that he can just chunk it down to, and that's George Pickens' skill set. He can also snag the ball. Like, it doesn't have to be a good pass. That's the great thing about George Pickens. Like, you just get it around him, and he can get some creative catches. So I do like how Russell Wilson will fit in this offense with these receivers. I agree that I'm not like super big on Russell Wilson having a killer year. I think from a football perspective, he had a more efficient 2023 than Sean Payton would like to admit, given how much he hated Russell Wilson on entrance. But I don't know that that's necessarily going to translate to the fantasy upside, primarily because Russ doesn't run the ball as much anymore, and he's just going to get buried because of that.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Before we move on and actually start talking about this draft, Austin, was there any under the radar signing, someone that's not getting the talk that you think they maybe should be getting for specifically looking at their dynasty value because of what happened in free agency?
Boy, that is a great question. I mean, I'm very curious to see what's going to happen with Deontay Johnson now that he is just the number one pass catcher definitively in Carolina. I think it's an interesting thing because he didn't really go to a better offense. He went to maybe a worse offense, but I'm curious. I feel like he could be in a better situation still because they've got to figure out how to get this Bryce Young offense working. And so he's going to be a key part of that. That's why they're bringing him here. Carolina was in the running for a T Higgins type for a clear number one that could just be that break in case of emergency receiver for Bryce Young. So he could end up having a pretty significant target share, and people may not want to go after him because the Panthers just went 2-15.
Yeah, definitely. I think the Panthers are going to be a red flag on a lot of people's or not even dynasty, but any draft rosters next year. They're just not going to be so sure about how to handle the Carolina Panthers. Mike, did you have anybody in mind, a player who signed or was traded and maybe affecting the dynasty landscape more than we're giving it credit for?
Well, yeah, not so much the player themselves, but more so. Hold on. Oh, you're so good at getting me right when I'm about to pick, Ryan.
So in a 10 team, I'm always going to get you when you're about to pick. Let's be perfectly clear. But if I notice it, I'll just keep talking. It's what I'm best at. So.
It's not so much guys themselves that were signed, but players on teams that guys left. So there are two third and fourth year players that I'm kind of interested in. The first one being Christian Kirk specifically. I was praying Calvin Ridley was going to leave Jacksonville. I was trying to target Kirk everywhere and just across leagues this year. I think he's one of the best buys out there. It's a guy who had 133 targets, not last year, but the year before with Trevor Lawrence. We already know he loves him. He got hurt last year, so a lot of people are, kind of out on him. He was, he's 27. He's getting to that age now, so I really think that, Christian Kirk is a guy who you can get for real cheap. He's probably my number one offseason buy at the moment. But also, I kind of want to ask you guys too. I don't know how you feel about Rashad Bateman. He's a very interesting story because some people are completely out, and I get it. But this was a really, really good prospect coming into the game. I mean, this is someone who had over 80 percentile in most the stats that matter, and was over the 93rd percentile in BOA and target share. So, I mean, this was a really, really good player for years in college. He had a solid rookie season. And his second year, his yards per route run jumped to like 2.5, 2.6, and then he got hurt. And then he was just buried. And it was just so weird. And guys like Odell Beckham were brought in. Now he's gone. I understand they drafted Zay Flowers. I know Andrews is coming back, but if there's someone who's willing to sell Bateman and there's some rookie fever for like a late second, definitely an early third, you got to be all over that. So those are two guys that I'm kind of looking at.
Yeah, we are on opposite ends of Bateman. As I was doing my dynasty rankings for football guys, we kind of get yelled at if we have guys way lower than everybody else. And Bateman is a guy I have way lower than everybody else. So like the app was yelling at me. So maybe I need to take another look. You hit on my biggest hesitation with Rashad Bateman, and that is Baltimore seems to keep overlooking him. Now, if they don't add another wide receiver in this draft or via free agency, I might be a little bit in, but man, your late second price tag surprises me. you couldn't beg me to give up a late second for Rashad Bateman right now. So we're definitely on opposite ends of that spectrum. So that one's interesting. But yeah, if they don't add anybody else, because they've already name checked him, and you got to be careful with coach speak, but they've already said they want him more involved. So it's going to be interesting. Guys, let's move into the draft a little bit. So first and foremost, ton of new viewers out there right now. If you guys are not following us on YouTube, you're probably watching on Twitter right now. If you can click over to our YouTube, hit subscribe, it's going to cost you absolutely nothing, but it means the world to us. It would really help us out. But let's talk about, I always like to start with the first 3 rounds of the draft, and my co-hosts don't know this yet, but I'm going to put them on the spot a little bit. So guys, be looking over the first 3 rounds. I'm actually going to read these out. So it is a super flex draft. You're going to hear a lot of quarterback names. At 1-1, it's Josh Allen, then Patrick Mahomes, CJ Stroud, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Anthony Richardson. Quarterback run to start the draft. Amon-Ra St. Brown, the first wide receiver off the board. Crazy. Jamar Chase is the 1-8, Joe Burrow 1-9, and Caleb Williams finishes out the first round. That guy backs to back with Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb. I can't imagine he thought Williams and Jefferson were going to be there for him at 10. CeeDee Lamb, Bijan Robinson, Kyler Murray at the 2-4, and then a wide receiver run. Garrett Wilson, Tyreek Hill, Marvin Harrison, Puka Nacua, Jahmyr Gibbs, Breece Hall to end the round, and then we started back at the guy who had the 10th pick. Christian McCaffrey was an auto pick. Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, A.J. Brown, Drake London, Chris Olave, Jordan Love, Sam Laporta, Jonathan Taylor, Brock Purdy. When I look at the composition of this round, if I did my math right, I think it is 13 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 1 tight end, and that makes it 11 wide receivers through the first 30 picks. Obviously, you're going to see a lot of quarterbacks. But my question to you guys is, and Austin, I'm going to put you on the spot because you're the one who has to deal with me every week. When you look at these first 3 rounds, who does not belong in the first 3 rounds? We're going negative right off the rip. Who doesn't belong here,
in the first 3 rounds? So that does very much shade my response. So I have some interesting guys that I don't think belong in the first round, but we can get to that later. I'm gonna go.
Well, that's fine. No, that's what. And that if you want to go, you just don't believe they belong in the first round. That's fine. But I'm just saying, in these first 3 rounds, who is the outliers to you? So if it's someone who bothers you in the first round, go for it.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to go with the first round. The first 3 rounds, I feel like I'm okay with most of those players, but Amon-Ra St. Brown in the first round is the one that gets me. Ahead of both CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson, I can't get with that. So it may be in a 12-teamer. Amon-Ra makes it in like a late first round pick, but having him at the 107, particularly in Superflex, that one kind of surprises me. That's the biggest outlier to me. If I had to pick someone to kick out of the top 3, I would kick out Brock Purdy, which I think that the guys around him that came after him, like, they have similar upside, they have similar floor. And so at that point, I might wait and just get value at quarterback and focus on one of those other positions.
No, I'm good with that. Mike, let's start with the Amon-Ra St. Brown thing. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about wide receivers, I'm sure. There's a pretty clear accepted hierarchy when it comes to fantasy wide receivers right now, where it's Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, and for a lot of folks, Marvin Harrison belongs in that grouping. Amon-Ra St. Brown is not a name I've seen thrown in that grouping, and in this draft, he goes as the first wide receiver. So is that as egregious as it hits me in Austin's eyes?
Yes.
Okay.
It is. And again, it's crazy because I still feel like, I'm going to say this, but I still feel like he's quite possibly the most underrated dynasty asset out there.
Love Amon-Ra St. Brown.
No,
Let's all be very clear.
I'm going to sound like a hypocrite, but you're right. He should not be going above guys like Jefferson and Lamb. I know people are scared off that Jefferson's got to get a rookie quarterback, but again, it's just like with Devontae Adams, where again, the age difference is different, but every time Adams wasn't with, Aaron Rodgers, everyone was. Adams always produces. I know last year was a little off. He had Aiden O'Connell, which was just inexcusable that they ever thought he was worthy of being an NFL starter. So that's not Devontae's fault. But Amon-Ra was a little high, especially when you consider guys like Laporta and Gibbs and all the other people he's kind of fighting against. I'd have to kind of go with that. But the funny thing is, after those 3 guys, I'm putting Amon-Ra, Puka, Garrett Wilson. So he's right there. It's not, I don't think it's completely egregious, but he should not have been the wide receiver 1. I don't think, looking at this, I don't really have a whole lot of problems with the way the first 3 rounds went. I thought everyone did a pretty good job. One reason why, some people might look and say like, Anthony Richardson, how can you be that high on him at the 1-6? Well, again, rushing upside matters, and everybody, Allen, Hurts, Jackson, Richardson, those should have been 4 of the first 6 guys off the board. I mean, everybody nailed it. I was expecting somebody like Joe Burrow or something to go, sneak into one of those first couple quarterback picks. Also, shout out to El Jefe for sniping me on Kyler Murray. That's where I was going over Garrett Wilson. Again, the rushing upside is huge. So that's definitely, a big part of it there. But yeah, I don't see any egregious picks. I'm going to lie. I think everyone did a pretty good job with the way it looks.
No, nothing wrong with getting the first round right. So I'm good with that. Everything we just kind of talked about leads itself to one of the other questions I had pegged for you guys. And basically, I want to know who you guys consider the top tier of tight ends right now for Dynasty specifically. So when we look at this draft, Sam Laporta goes at the 3-8, and no other tight end goes until Brock Bowers at the 5-2. In my draft last week, Brock Bowers was actually the tight end 1 off the board. So for you guys, is Laporta the clear-cut tight end 1? And more importantly, who do you consider at this point in the elite class? There's one name that I throw in there that other people don't include, and I'm going to be interested to hear how you guys feel about him.
Can I take the lead on that one?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So, Ryan, just from being in a league with me, there is nobody, and I know everyone wants to claim it, but I'm telling you, you're wrong. There's no one that was higher on Sam Laporta than I was last year. I promise you that. Maybe David, David Gutierrez,
I was just going to say, me and you had a whole trade discussion in David Gautier's league about where Laporta was going to go. And me and you were trying to work a trade that you refused to work because you thought Laporta was going to be there for you.
So what I ended up doing, I traded up to the 112 to get him in our league last year. Which was crazy. And drafting Laporta in the first round, people are like, what are you doing? Again, I'm not here to toot my own horn, but he is easily the tight end 1 right now. He proved it last year. He was a stud in college. He was a high second round pick. He plays in a great offense with a great quarterback. He's number 1. But how crazy is it that Travis Kelce just went at the 7-4? If you said this last year, you would get slapped in the face if you suggested that he would last that long.
Travis Kelce doesn't make it 70 picks in any draft that Ryan
it just doesn't. It's crazy. And I'm not saying that there's not a reason for that, but it's crazy how the dynasty landscape has changed. I do think there are guys now, before it was Travis Kelce and everyone else. Right now, I would say probably Laporta, McBride are my 1-2 pretty easily. Brock Bowers, I'm sorry, you got to see where he goes. And I'm not going to get into it, but I'm just not as high on Brock Bowers as some others. I do have major size concerns with him. I think he's more of a tweener. But in today's NFL, fine, maybe he'll get up there. But the tight end landscape is strange. And I almost went with Laporta over London because I knew that if I didn't get Laporta, I probably wasn't taking tight end for a long time. And I'm just kind of going with value. I don't usually go, running back, but again, Saquon sitting there in the 6th round, Jacobs after those 2 contracts they just got, so not to go into a tangent here of running backs, but like I said, I knew if I wasn't getting Laporta, I probably wasn't touching tight end for a bit outside of McBride.
So just to confirm, you say Laporta and McBride are 1 and 2. Bowers, you're not completely sold on. Do you have Laporta and McBride just ahead of everybody else? Would they be your tier 1?
Yeah, and I don't even think there's anyone that's even really close to them at the moment, to be honest. I think there's a pretty clear tier break after them.
Okay. Austin, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think Laporta is the number 1, mostly because of the age and the usage, that combo. I think, I am more interested in Brock Bowers, so I have him up at 2, but it's a coin flip to me between him and Travis Kelce. Like, those are my top 3 clearing away. The rest, I feel like you could take a bet on, but I think they're going to fluctuate from year to year. Those 3 feel like the primary candidates that are going to be consistent year over year. Brock Bowers obviously hasn't proven it yet. I would only do that on a strategy where I'm purposefully starting out young and playing the starting a 3-year process where you're trying to win in that 3rd year. But I agree. I was curious. I passed on Travis Kelce in the 6th round because I wanted to see, is he going to make it back to me?
And I do that so much in drafts where I won't take a guy just because I want to see where they're going to end up.
And if he had made it back
drafts,
to me,
not real drafts.
If he had made it back to me, I would have taken him. He wasn't falling past the 7-7 in this draft. So he's still in the top 3 to me. I'm curious about McBride next year, just because there were some receiver injuries that happened in Arizona on the back half of the season that could have played a role in his usage. And they are in prime Marvin Harrison, Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors territory. does that minimize McBride's usage? Probably. So a little bit interested how that all shakes out.
So neither one of you mentioned the guy who I kind of got yelled at for mentioning in the higher level grouping last week rather. So Kelsey did just fall to my tier 2. You can't ignore age. You can't ignore what we saw at the end of the season. I will take him on every fantasy team. But the guy El Jefe paired him with, Dalton Kincaid, was a very highly touted guy as a receiver last year, which is what you want in fantasy. And the Bills have no damn wide receivers. They may still end up trading Stephon Diggs with all the disgruntled stuff going on there. I am very high on Dalton Kincaid and apparently a little too high, Austin.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably like, he's in my tier 2. It's not like I think he's like being taken that far high. These teams like Buffalo, like Kansas City, they take this approach where they have like 12 receivers and they're going to feature a different one of them every week. And that type of offensive system makes me nervous to make a significant investment in when you're trying to just pick the one player who's going to be clearing away the best in that offense. And that's my situation with Dalton Kincaid. We saw when Dawson Knox was in the offense, he was still getting targets. Like, this wasn't just Dalton Kincaid being tight end, the only tight end utilized in the pass game in Buffalo. And they honestly, like, they started making a shift to being more balanced last year too. They wanted to feature James Cook more so that they were taking pressure off of Josh Allen. So there's a lot less certainty in this offense, despite what the roster looks like right now. Also, we haven't gotten to the draft yet. Like, this is a deep receiver class. They're going to be able to pick up receivers late in the first and the second and third that are going to be decent day one starters, despite falling to the second or third round.
I think that's fair. Mike, you mentioned that you are not as high on Brock Bowers and you have your reasons for it. Dalton Kincaid versus Brock Bowers. You're on the clock. Which one are you taking?
Well, again, it's landing spot dependent. And I know that that's such a cop out, but I kind of feel the same way. I feel the same way about Kincaid. I think that he's very, similar to Kincaid. If Bowers goes to somewhere, a situation like Detroit where he's going to get all the targets Laporta did, then great. But if Kincaid goes to the Bills, I know everyone was so high on him last year, and I did not get it. Like, clearly look at everything they've been doing these past couple of years. They have Dawson Knox, so they still put in there and use a lot. Well, he's a blocking tight end. He's also a big red zone target too for them. Huge red zone target for them. And he also still gets his targets. Diggs, I don't think, they're still in the championship window. They're not getting rid of Diggs. I'll be shocked if they do that. They just signed Curtis Samuel. You mentioned James Cook. Dalton Kincaid has the talent, but I just don't think he has the opportunity that guys like Laporta and McBride doesn't. I understand that, they're very likely to take a wide receiver, the Cardinals, with that fourth pick, and everyone's stuck up Michael Wilson, who is fine. But, yeah. I mean, come on. And Trey McBride is good. He showed, again, everything from yards per route run from college to, even last year. And he was still getting his targets. Kyler Murray's back, so a lot of the year last year, Kyler Murray wasn't there. And when he was, he loved throwing to Trey McBride. So, I think that McBride is still a pretty safe pick. Yeah, he might lose some targets, depending on, how good Harrison Jr. or Dunze, whoever may be. But yeah. Yeah.
And I think the one thing interesting about this is part of what we're talking about right now is the difference between the tier 1 tight ends and the tier 2 tight ends. I think the gap between those two tiers is the smallest it has been in a long time. And so
Kelsey used to be a tier 1 by his own, Austin.
Exactly.
But I know what you mean.
Like, he used to be scoring 100 points more than the next best tight end consistently. Like, we had that happen 2 or 3 years in a row. And the tight end position has been like that for a while, but offenses have started featuring a number 1 tight end more frequently in recent years. So I can't disagree that much with either one of you, even though my top 3 is Laporta, Bowers, and Kelsey. I can see putting McBride in there. Like, it's not that unreasonable to me. I could see putting Kincaid in there. It's less reasonable to me, but I'm still not appalled by it. I could see putting Kyle Pitts in there. He's still 22 years old. So I think too, the gap is so much closer this year that it's easier to make a case for some of these fringe tier 1 tight ends than it ever has been.
I think it's a really good point. And like I said, I'm learning a lot here. Just as a story, I love to share with you guys the crazy shit I've done in dynasty leagues. And Mike was a part of this because me and Mike were trying to work deals. We couldn't get things done. I notoriously hate short wide receivers, 5'9", 5'8". You're going to have a lot of trouble being on my fantasy team. I was choosing between Dalton Kincaid and Zay Flowers. Dalton Kincaid is 6'4", Zay Flowers is 5'9". I took Dalton Kincaid, and my God, every time I talk to someone smarter than me, I regret that pick over and over again because I feel like I would much rather have Zay Flowers on my rebuilding team right now. So that's a rough one.
That's not a rough one. Zay Flowers is still a great pick. To me, I think it comes to
no. I took Kincaid over Flowers. You hate Kincaid.
No. Right, but what I'm saying though is I don't hate it because you got to look at positional value. It is so hard to get a good tight end and wide receiver. Yes, it's important to have good elite wide receivers, but after the elite guys, that next tier is this long. So it's like you have so much more of an opportunity to get a great wide receiver than you do a tight end. It's so much easier to get them off waivers, as a throw-in in a trade, as a random second-round pick. So it's really hard to get a good tight end. And the thing is, this Kincaid's still young. So if things change in the next year or two, he has the talent to become that number one target and make it to tier one. So you still have a guy who has the upside to make it to tier one, which is important. And to me, that actually probably is more valuable than a guy like Zay Flowers, who, while he looked great last year, Andrews is coming back. Like I said, I'm a little higher than Bateman than others, but they signed Derrick Henry, so they're going to run the shit out of the ball. So maybe at the end of this year, you're going to look like the smart guy.
I hope so. Guys, the draft is going to get covered up for a little bit. I will scroll down eventually. I remind everybody the draft is something we do to find topics to talk about on this show. Mocking is about practicing strategy, and we're going to talk a little bit about that at the end and about learning trends. That's all I want you guys to take from this, so don't worry about what you're missing. We'll get there eventually. Before I move on to another question, I want to get I think you said this was your nephew? Cousin?
That's my nephew, yes.
Nephew. Thoughts on David Njoku? So Njoku obviously saw a resurgence last year, played well enough with Deshaun Watson, played fantastic with Joe Flacco, 27 years old, if I'm correct, which is not all that old for a tight end. So a lot of life left in David Njoku. Where do we kind of feel about him? Austin, I'll let you get started.
Yeah, I've always been a notorious David Njoku hater. I think he had one solid year early on when he was with Atlanta, and I got excited, and then after that I was like, I'm good. I think I'm still a little bit skeptical about him too, just because this offense, I don't know what it's going to look like with Deshaun Watson back under center. It never seemed to click last year, and I don't feel like it's gonna. I mean, you're betting on an improvement from Watson that he gets back to his typical self. So I would much rather avoid Njoku right now. Now there's always a price I'm willing to pay. Like if he fell far enough, maybe I would take the chance, but for now I would just pass.
Before I let you answer, Mike, Joel, one of our writers, chimes in and says Njoku belongs in tier 1. That feels bold to me.
That's wrong.
That is incorrect.
Thumbs down for Joel.
That is absolutely incorrect. So remember how I said Christian Kirk was number 1 buy candidate this offseason? David Njoku, number 1 sell candidate this offseason. Pretty easily. Not even close for me. So I am trying like hell in one of my leagues. Chris is in one of them, but he's got tight ends, so it doesn't matter. I'm not giving away secrets here. But I'm trying to sell Njoku like crazy, and I have been as soon as the season ended. The tear that he went on with Flacco last year was just absurd. It is just – that is not going to happen again anywhere. He's a very talented player, and if he gets targets, that's fine. But they literally just traded for another wide receiver, and they still have Amari Cooper. And I get injuries happen and this and that. I'm not saying that he's not a good guy to have that could get you, 10 points there and there's upside. But like anyone that thinks that he is just suddenly this like tier 1 tight end, I got, like I said, I got oceanfront property in Montana to sell you. So that's kind of how I feel about Njoku.
I think that's fair. All right. This is Austin's least favorite part of the show, but I think the week 1 question is actually going to be pretty easy for you. Guys, I like to put these guys through a keep trade cut that they were not aware of when they came into the show. And Josh brought up when we were talking about who didn't belong in the first 3 rounds, that you could argue that Trevor Lawrence doesn't belong in the first 3 rounds. And then he got some arguments of his own in the group chat where they were not agreeing with that statement. But there is a player who went a little bit higher than he went in our draft last week that caught some people's eyes. So I'm going to have you guys compare Trevor Lawrence, Brock Purdy, who did get called out, and then Dak Prescott, who falls all the way to the 4-6. So when we are looking at Dynasty, Austin, keep trade cut Trevor Lawrence, Dak Prescott, and Brock Purdy.
Oh boy. I actually don't like this one.
Oh, there you go. The streak continues. Austin is always so angry with me.
I think Jeez. Well, the thing that's tricky about this, is that the cut always ends up being the person that I think has the most trade value. So I don't really want to cut them, or the least trade value. So
the least trade value. Yep.
The least trade value. So I would keep Trevor Lawrence because I'm like, I think he's gonna figure it out. I think this offense, like he's dealt with injury, this offense has been a little bit shaky. So I would give him a better chance, especially because he's younger. Like we have time for him to continue to develop. I would trade Brock Purdy because I think people like him and they want the Purdy experience. And so that just leaves Dak Prescott to cut because I don't think you're going to get any trade value for him because of his age. And also because people will buy into the NFL narratives and think that, oh, well, he's not that good. He can't finish. And I'm like, well, I would rather keep him than trade him. Like for me to keep decisions between Trevor Lawrence and Dak Prescott, but I would slightly favor Trevor Lawrence.
Mike, anything you would change there?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to cut the number 3 quarterback in fantasy last year. I get it, but see, this is the one thing about Dynasty that this is why I love playing Dynasty. People focus so much on age. To some people, that's all that matters. They don't even try to win. They just try to have the youngest roster. Yep. If you look at my roster, I have a very old team. If you look at it right now. But I balanced it by going very young to start, and then I came back with Jordan Addison, but then I went Devontae Adams after taking guys like Prescott and Barkley and Jacobs, those old geezers at running back that just got fat contracts. So if I had to do keep, trade, cut, it's hard. My cut would probably be Purdy. I think that's an easy one for me. There's absolutely no rushing upside there. We know that Kyle Shanahan will kick his quarterbacks to the curb faster than, I don't know. I can't think of a good analogy, but he's not someone who is very loyal to his quarterbacks if he finds someone who he thinks is better at the moment. Brock Purdy's got some good weapons. Some of them are getting older, injured. Things could change there pretty easy. He's my easy cut. It is tough to decide who to trade between Dak and Lawrence because my keep would probably be Lawrence because of age. And I do think that if you're looking at a contender, especially someone who needs a QB2, why wouldn't they pay up for Dak Prescott? I mean, you know what I mean? So I would say probably keep Lawrence, trade Prescott, but don't trade him for pennies on the dollar. If you can get a higher value for Lawrence because of his age, then trade him and keep Prescott.
And that's usually how keep, trade, cut goes. I agree with your second answer there. I'm getting rid of Purdy. I am trading Trevor Lawrence because I think the trade value is higher. And I'll keep a top 5 fantasy quarterback who's tied to CeeDee Lamb in fantasy football with Dak Prescott. He's only 30. I'm not freaking out about age. So I like that. I'll throw Josh up on the screen since he kind of sparked this a little bit. Keep Purdy, trade T-Law, cut Dak. So you're just wrong about keeping Purdy.
You can't cut Dak Prescott. Are you kidding me? You're giving away a ton. Anyway. This is what I work with.
I will say the devil's advocate argument for cutting Dak Prescott to throw out there is that yes, he was QB3 last year. He was QB 18 the year before. So is he going to consistently show up that way now? New offense, maybe that's what continues. But he also just went on a tear last year, and we've seen him have seasons where he is killer and then seasons where he's not. And it's sort of how the Cowboys offense goes. I agree. Like it's a toss up for me between Trevor Lawrence and Dak Prescott. So like, I'm not mad about it either way, but the devil's advocate is maybe like, was last year the outlier for Dak Prescott?
It's a fair point. I just think the upside with him is just insane, especially with a guy like CeeDee Lamb now, and Mike McCarthy still there calling the plays. He did that, and everyone wants to get on McCarthy, but they did a pretty damn good job last year. So
yeah. Before we scroll down and see the back end of this draft, and just so you guys know, I will have you guys start reviewing your teams and strategies at about the 50-minute mark. I want to give you guys time to talk about your team, so we'll kind of start focusing on you guys around that point. Though this next question very much focuses on Austin's team, I'm not going to focus on how you took them. I kind of want to know if the gap is there. This was a question that came up during last week's show, and Mike, I'm going to have you get us started here. Marvin Harrison Jr. goes at the 2-7 to Austin. Almost 2 full rounds later, we see Malik Neighbors at the 4-4, and then another 5 picks before we see Roma Duze at the 4-9. Is the gap that big? I know Marvin Harrison is being called a generational talent, and I love him. I'm an Ohio guy. Of course, I'm going to love an Ohio State wide receiver. But I've also been told by others that the gap may not necessarily be that big. So how do you feel about 2 full rounds before we see Malik Neighbors and more than 2 full rounds before we see Roma Dunze after Marvin Harrison goes off the
Once again, Ryan, it's my turn to pick. Give me 1 second there.
I told you, man. I'm perfect at that. The problem is I'm staring at the draft board when I'm asking these questions. I actually don't see who's on the clock.
I love it. So I don't think the gap is as big. I think he's clearly number one. But I do think that it would be Neighbors and then Odunze right there too. I think all three of these guys are very, very good. But what I will say is there are the next 1, 2, 3, 4, definitely 4 wide receivers that went after Harrison. I easily would have taken over him. I think there are guys. Yeah. I think there are guys like, Puka, Olave, London, Brown. Just you feel safer. We still don't know where Harrison is going. We don't know what his situation is going to be. So I get that in Dynasty, you have to get ahead of the game. You have to take these guys now because you may not be able to get them later. But when you have those 4 other guys who you already know are going to be studs, to take them or Harrison over them is a little surprising. But do I think the gap between Harrison, Odunze, and Neighbors is a lot closer than people think? Yes, I do.
Very, very interesting that you would go Puka, big Puka guy here. Puka Nacua, who just came out of nowhere and is now going over Marvin Harrison to Mike Mattis. Austin, you obviously
drafted wide receiver season ever, by the way.
That's
literally of all time.
Yep.
Just say it.
If CJ Stroud doesn't exist, he's rookie of the year pretty easily. And they end up both on Chris. They end up both on Chris's team here. Now, Austin, I don't need you to talk about why you took these guys, but let's just focus strictly on the gap. Did Neighbors feel like a big value for you, having taken Marvin Harrison where you took him in the second round? Did getting Neighbors 2 full rounds later, was that a little surprising to you?
Yeah, I think it is a little surprising. And I think, we're still early in Dynasty season. We're still early in not everybody watches the combine like us nerds do and like stuff like that. So people are still learning these players. Not everybody watches college football. So, I mean, I've heard people talk about Neighbors potentially getting drafted ahead of Marvin Harrison. Like they're that close. And Neighbors.
I saw that story as well. And that's why I wanted to ask this.
I placed a bet on that. Sorry.
Did you?
A cheap one. Why not? Just for the odds, like $10. Go ahead.
I mean, probably you got great odds on that, and it's not that out of the ballpark of possibilities. So I do think the gap should be closer. What really surprised me was when guys like Brandon Ayuk and Nico Collins started going before Malik Neighbors. I can get with, similar to what Mike was saying, I can get taking Puka Nacua, AJ Brown, Drake London, Chris Olave ahead of him. But after that, I'm like, I want the young receiver who is going to be the best, probably going to be the best receiver on his team almost no matter where he lands. So I do think the gap is too far there. And similar with Rome Odunze, I think it's more likely that he is the 3rd receiver of this class, but people have also said maybe Odunze should go ahead of Neighbors. So I really think that those top 3 in this year's class could all go really close together. And some of it, depends on your style. If you prefer to do a win now and you just want to take the players you know are going to be good, I get passing on those rookies. But I think that as we get closer to the draft, the ADP difference between those 3 is going to get smaller and smaller.
I think it's really interesting because, like I said, you hear the term generational thrown around, but you have very smart people willing to bet that Neighbors goes ahead of Marvin Harrison. So I think that's going to be real interesting to see how that plays out come the end of April. Guys, I've scrolled the draft a little bit. Looking at the end here, and you guys took a few of these players that I want to bring up. There was a question I didn't get to ask last week before I have you guys review your teams in whole. And this question based around older wide receivers. All these guys are about 30 years old, and they all almost went in the exact same spot of this draft. And that's why I want to bring them up. My pants get tight when I look at rounds 7 to 9. Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen are all guys who we have seen relatively recently put up top 10 fantasy seasons. But because age is a number, they are getting pushed way down the board here. And there's actually another guy I have on the list who I'm struggling to think he may not have went yet. Amari Cooper is only 28, about to be 29, just put up one of the best seasons of his life. Hasn't even went if I'm not seeing him properly here. How do we feel about
ninth round?
Okay, ninth round. Okay, I just missed it when I was getting all excited about seeing Keenan Allen's name there. Oh yeah, he's right fucking next to Keenan Allen. We all know who I have eyes for. So yeah, 7th to 9th round, the older wide receivers. Austin, is there an age where you just start avoiding these guys altogether? I noticed you did not take any of them. So is there an age where you'll start avoiding these guys where you just want to keep stacking the young guys? Whereas wide receiver is a position that can play a little bit later into life.
Yeah, I mean the stereotypical answer is age 29. Once you get there, that's when the fall off starts to happen for wide receivers. I don't necessarily intentionally avoid older receivers. I will happily go after them, particularly if I'm doing a win now strategy and just treat it like redraft. Like that's totally fine by me. I think the ADP on these guys in this draft shows why doing a win now, win year one strategy is really worth it. Like you get your buyback in immediately and fund your dynasty rebuild for the next 5 to 10 seasons, based depending on how the fees break out. So I think it's totally fine to take some of those guys over age 29. It does get riskier because you never know when the cliff is going to come, and for some receivers the cliff comes really quickly. But that's typically where I start to have a little bit more. I start to think more carefully about whether or not I will take the receiver, but it's not like a hard line. Like I'm not going to take a receiver over 29.
And Mike, you obviously don't have that strategy as you took Davante Adams at the 8-6. My first question to you is, does Stephon Diggs belong a full round ahead of Davante Adams? And then do Diggs and Adams belong a full round ahead of Keenan Allen? Like that, a lot of that value doesn't scream correct to me.
Well, I mean, I think Keenan's value took a big hit. I mean, it's going to be hard because, for him to get much, because, I mean, he's going to a team with another established wide receiver one as well. So it actually, I hate it because it kills both their value. It was just such a bummer. Like that was such a bummer of a trade.
Broke my heart. Literally.
That was the worst trade of the offseason.
My exact words to Josh and Joe when they sent the text was, well, fuck.
Yeah, dude.
That's all I said.
Like literally fuck the Bears. Anyway, but so 20, you're right. I'm with Austin. 29 is kind of that age where I start getting hesitant. But at the same time, 27, 28 is my favorite age for a wide receiver because it is so easy to buy them at that age. That is when you strike, folks. When somebody is 27, 28, look for those guys who are obsessed with age and obsessed with picks and obsessed with getting young guys on their team, and go get those guys. Like I got Davante Adams a couple years ago. Now, to be fair, I lost that trade because I actually traded Mike Evans and a first-round pick to Chris at the 103. So got to give him credit there.
Yeah.
So it can work out, against you sometimes, but Davante Adams is still producing at a high level. His quarterback is just absolute garbage. It's
perfect now.
I know I do love myself some Gardner Minshew, but basically no, the 29-30 age, it is real, not just in terms of physical things you need to worry about, but perfect example is look what happened with Keenan Allen. Now he got hurt, but he was still performing at the top of his game. So from a talent standpoint, there's nothing to be worried about. But the things you need to start thinking about, especially when it comes to dynasty, are things like contract situation. What is this team doing? What position are the Chargers in? Because as good as Keenan Allen is, he's not. There's so much more of a chance for these older guys to get moved or get cut, even if they are that good, and their whole situation could change. So again, Keenan Allen's talent didn't go down, but his situation sure did. And that you start seeing more of that as these guys get older. So the 29-30 apex it's real for wide receivers. And I'm not completely out on them. You've got to be careful.
So I'm going to throw in one last name before I let you guys talk about your team, because you're both about to make your last picks. So I loved everything you guys said there. I'll go a little bit older. 30, I'm still going to buy in a little bit. But what is interesting to me is we talked about all that, and all those guys went between the 7th and the 9th round. And I understand the guy I'm about to compare them to is performing at a much higher level, but he also said he is retiring in 2 years. Tyreek Hill is 30 years old and went at the 2-6. So knowing that you both just said 30 is where you start to get scared off from a wide receiver, is Tyreek Hill still worth a second-round pick in Dynasty, Austin?
Yeah. In Dynasty, I mean, yes. I think it's still worth it because he has that wide receiver one upside.
He's a game changer.
He's a game changer. I'm a little surprised he went ahead of Marvin Harrison personally. I thought that just was everything I needed to know to just smash Marvin Harrison right there. But I think it's totally fine. I mean, he's just so good. And particularly if you're just saying, I'm winning this year, I'm all in on this season, like that's particularly when you take Tyreek Hill. If you're trying to say, I'm going to win in 3 years, do not take Tyreek Hill. That is an awful strategy. But if you're saying like, I want to win year one, that's the way to go.
Perfect. Mike, do you agree? Is he still worth that 2-6? And I know if we're in win now, and Mike, you and I are always in win now, Tyreek Hill is worth way more than the 2-6. But it's just interesting to me that we have Cooper Kupp, who is 3 years removed from a wide receiver one, the overall wide receiver one. Keenan Allen, who played as a top 10 last year, Mike Evans, who played as a top 10, Amari Cooper, who played as a top 10. Diggs had a down year, but he's a few years removed from a great season. You've already talked about Devontae Adams. We were comfortable with all these guys falling in the 7th. Tyreek Hill is 30 years old and is the 2-6 in this draft, the 4th wide receiver taken.
I think Austin nailed it. I think he said it perfectly where, again, don't just head to dynasty drafts. I know I've hammered this, but it's not all about taking the youngest guy. But if you have to have an idea of what kind of approach you're going with. If you're going to go young, then no, you cannot take Tyreek Hill in the 2nd round. Austin is absolutely right. But if you're going to take the approach that I did and go after some old guys and try to win at first, then yeah, he's absolutely, like you said, he's a game changer. The guy is, he was a cheat code last year. I know toward the end of the season, he kind of fell off a bit. I think that was a little due to injury, but he was, especially in that offense. So yeah, Austin, you're right. It depends on how you're going to draft. You can't just draft him willy-nilly, but if you've got the team for it, or if you're a contender right now and you want to make a trade and someone wants to give you him for like an early 2nd or something, absolutely go do it.
All right, guys. I agree with everything that was said there. Just like I said, I wanted to draw out kind of the hypocrisy there. So, Mike, this is your first time doing this show. You do not need to talk about every pick. All I ask is that, did you come in with a strategy? You mentioned you got sniped a few times. Were you forced to change that strategy? And any players about your team that you feel you didn't get a chance to talk about that you'd like to?
Yeah, so like I said, Anthony Richardson might surprise some people, but if you look at his stats from his first 3 games as an NFL player, they were absolutely silly. Again, you cannot look at how they're going to be, don't try to evaluate how good are they as a quarterback. This is fantasy football. Rushing is what matters at the quarterback position. I cannot tell you anything more important than that. So as long as you have one guy with rushing upside, you absolutely go for it. Again, I am someone who does like to win, so I want to take some established guys who are going to get me some points, but you got to balance it out. So Garrett Wilson and Drake London, especially getting Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins back as their quarterbacks, are 2 guys with top 12 potential. But even if I suck, they're 2 guys who are going to be great on my team for years. You want to build your core at the wide receiver position. It has the longest longevity, and it's the one where you can bank on it and go, all right, at least I know I'm going to have these guys for a long time. We already talked about Dak Prescott. I usually don't go running back very high, but to see the value on Jacobs and Barkley right there, I had to take it. If you look at my next 3 wide receivers, I took 2 guys who are, old geezers, but that still produce. But I balanced it by making sure I got a guy like Jordan Addison, another young wide receiver who I can build around there. I usually don't go that late at tight end. I usually like to get someone early. It just didn't work out for me. Like I said, I considered Laporta over London just for positional value. But in terms of overall points, I just think that London has the chance for more with those touchdowns and those yards that he'll get from Cousins. So that's my way with him there. I wanted McBride, got sniped 2 picks before me, which is why I went Jacobs. I would have gone McBride there. But again, you can see it's a balanced team. There's some young guys. I was able to get Marvin Mims in the 14th round. I was stoked about that.
Yeah, that doesn't seem in line with what Twitter felt his value was.
I know. I didn't believe it was there. I'm like, oh shit! And I just when I saw it, I was like, oh my god. So, but again, so it's about balance. I mean, yeah, I've got some older guys, but I am trying to win it first. And then I have balanced it for the future, where I have some young guys, especially at the wide receiver position, that I can bank on and trust for years. So that was my approach.
I love it. And I like to remind everybody multiple times, in a real dynasty startup, you're probably going 20, 25, sometimes even 30 picks deep in a 10-team league. So we are only doing half the draft. So there's going to be a lot of players that you're like, they didn't go. Yeah, they didn't go and they're going to go, but that's just, we don't have time for that. Austin, you know the deal at this point.
Yeah. So first off, my strategy overall, I've been trying out going some version of a 0 running back strategy in Dynasty, both this week and with the Dynasty After Party draft we did last weekend.
Yeah.
The big discrepancy in that strategy is I did not get tight end early, which I think is going to make this team a little bit tough. But I've been trying to wait on running backs just because I feel like they only have a few seasons. And so I've quit paying the premium for them unless it's going to be some like clear generational guy. Like if they're clear top 3, I'll go with a running back early, but I'm trying it out right now and seeing what it feels like when I wait and wait and wait. And this one felt great.
I was going to say, this worked out really well for you.
Yeah. First off, before I get to the running backs, I just want to talk about getting Jalen Hurts at the 104. Like Mike said it. running quarterbacks are key for fantasy football. And the fact that I got him after Patrick Mahomes and CJ Stroud went off, like, look, they may be the top 2 best quarterbacks in the league right now from an NFL perspective, but they're not for fantasy football. Patrick Mahomes, like, he just, his goal is to win a game. He doesn't care about stats. He doesn't need to care about stats. Everybody knows he's the best. CJ Stroud, he doesn't run the ball. So Jalen Hurts, getting him at the 104 is great. We're going to have plenty of time to talk about Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors throughout the draft season. So I'm going to hold off my commentary on them. The other guy I wanted to point out is Jalen Waddle in the 5th round. Getting him in the 5th round in a dynasty startup is wild to me because we just talked about Tyreek Hill's about to retire. Who's the other receiver in that offense? It's Jalen Waddle.
Jalen Waddle.
And when Tyreek Hill is out, Jalen Waddle gets a ton of targets. So I don't get how far he fell. And then waiting on running back, I mean, Rachaad White, he just gets the volume. He's not efficient. He's not great, but he gets enough volume that he's going to be just fine. Najee Harris in an Arthur Smith offense, I feel great about. Yeah. So overall, I feel good about this. It started to get tougher for me as we went along, figuring out how to balance that young versus old strategy. I tried to just stick to young players because my mistake that I tend to make in dynasty startups is I start with one strategy and then midway pivot, and then my team ends up like crap because I didn't stick to a consistent strategy. So I tried my best to stay young, and that's why I ended up going after guys like Jameson Williams, who feels like a value if he ends up having that 3-year breakout, and then taking just some value tight ends, getting that Philadelphia stack. And I love me some Luke Musgrave. Like I have 2 quarterback tight end stacks with this team, which is really fun. So overall, I feel decent about how this team played out, and we'll see. We'll try out a new strategy next week.
Austin can't stop playing DFS is what it really comes down to. My oops of the draft actually played into one of our user questions. Let me grab this question up on the screen for you guys here. If JJ McCarthy goes to the Vikings, doesn't he get drafted in the Daniels Drake May range? So let me go ahead and get Austin's team off the screen here. JJ McCarthy going at the 11-9 was already my oops of the draft. This is a quarterback being projected in the 1st round of the NFL draft, quite possibly to the Minnesota Vikings, who have Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Letting him fall that far seems like a really, really bad play. So great job, Base Brody there. Josh pointed out the second part of my oops of the draft, and that is Bo Nix going almost a full round or more than a full round ahead of JJ McCarthy. So my question is, should a quarterback who is being looked at very, very heavily in the 1st round of the NFL draft, guys, be falling this far? Or do you guys believe if he ends up in the Vikings, we see him up in the 6th round where we saw Drake May and Jaden Daniels go? Austin. Yeah.
So when we get into just some rookie drafts, I'm going to have some interesting takes on quarterbacks this year. 1st round quarterbacks don't have a great track record. Like, it's not that cut and dry that they're going to be good. When you look at the 2021 draft that had Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Mac Jones, and Justin Fields, where are they all now? Josh is saying that Trevor Lawrence shouldn't be in the top 30, and he's the best one of the crew, right? So I don't feel strongly that he must certainly be going higher, JJ McCarthy, regardless of where he lands. And also, I think he's a good candidate to sit a year, especially if he goes to the Vikings. Like, they signed Sam Darnold, and I wouldn't be surprised if they just rode with him for a year. So it might depend on the landing spot, but I don't think he clearly goes in that Drake May, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels tier. Those 3 feel like far and away the best 3 quarterbacks in this class. And so I'm fine with McCarthy falling. Behind Bo Nix, that's a different question. I think that I don't love as much, but I don't feel like him falling to the 11th is that big a deal.
All right, Mike, how are your thoughts on JJ McCarthy before we get out of here?
So I'm going to say, and I'm not trying to be hot takey here. Again, in terms of NFL careers, I think that JJ McCarthy will far outlast Jaden Daniels. I am not a Jaden Daniels fan whatsoever. I don't think that he deserves to be taken anywhere within the top 10 picks in the NFL draft. I think it's too much of a risk. But when it comes to fantasy, if he gets the role, he's got to be the one behind Caleb. You know what I mean? Again, because the rushing upside. So again, don't let your priors or how you feel about them as a player affect how you view them in the fantasy world. I think that it's Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, JJ McCarthy. But, in terms of fantasy, because I still think, again, that I think there's going to be more longevity with Drake May. So, but McCarthy, he shouldn't have gone after Nix. I also considered him over Levis, but Levis has got an established role right now. He's got 2 great receivers. He had some high upside games last year, so which is why I went with Levis over him. But that's kind of how I view that situation.
Perfect. So sorry to disappoint Chris. I don't rate teams. It's just not what we're here for. I will put this draft up on Twitter and let people comment on it. So make sure you're following Club Fantasy over on Twitter. That said, Gator J says he had the best draft. So but you have 1 vote for Gator J saying he had the best draft. So there's that. That's just not why we do this show, Chris. It's about kind of just learning through the draft. So you had a great draft. We talked about your team a lot. We're just not going to rate teams. Mike, I know you're not currently creating content. If you have any passion projects, anything you want to pitch, or at the very least, who are you still following in the fantasy community that other people should be following?
Well, obviously, gotta love good old Club Fantasy. But no, I mean, I've been out of it for a bit. I like hopping on some podcasts, having fun with some old Twitter friends. I'm not writing like I used to. Also, sadly, Ball Blast Football is no longer in existence. But please do follow Kate Majuk, Michelle Majuk. They're both 2 of the best in the industry, 2 of the best people you'll ever talk to, and 2 great analysts. We already shouted out, David Gautieri, who is literally someone who has made me a better fantasy player. I mean it. He is fantastic. Just being in leagues with him, following him on Twitter. He is like the tight end guru for good reason.
You're following him on this show because he was the guest on our show last week.
There you go. I mean, he's, David's great. Kevin Coleman was already on there too. He's another one, following, him and your buddies at Football Guys. So, it's just fun still being involved, talking to you guys here and there. And I'm not going full bore, but I love this community, and I appreciate you inviting me on and let me come on, and I'd totally come on again sometime soon.
Literally, first episode, I was like, who could I get as my first guest but Mike? I think you were my first ever guest on our DFS show with Kira. So
I know.
We belong together.
I miss Kira too. Let's do a show with Kira soon.
I'm going to yell at Kira. First of all, Kira, if you are watching, Kira ghosted me every time I tried to get her on this show last year. I know she had a lot of shit going on. Exactly. We are friends. You don't ghost me, Kira. So I'll get her on this week and I'll yell at her live on air for everybody. Austin, what do you got going on, buddy?
Yeah, so you can first off follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Austin_FFL. We'll be getting into some off-season content, I'm sure, with Club Fantasy FFL. And you can also catch all of my Carolina Panthers coverage at Last Word on NFL.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So guys, their Twitter handles are in their things here. Make sure you're following both of them. At the very least, Mike will be retweeting all the people he really likes. So you'll be able to see who he follows and follow them too, or you can just follow Mike. We do this show. Well, we do mock drafts now twice a week. You're going to get this show every single Saturday at 11 moving forward. I usually run this show through August. So as long as there are no more family emergencies, you guys are about to be stuck with me for 6 straight months to start your Saturdays. But we are still going to be participating in Mock Draft Monday with our newest show, Mocking with the Stars. That is Gator J's show. It is going to take place at 10 p.m. Eastern, and he is swinging for the fences with his guest. He gets the great Howard Bender this week. So 48 hours from now, make sure you're checking that show out. Another mock draft, 2 of them coming every single week from Club Fantasy. You should probably just hit subscribe on the YouTube page. That's going to make things easier. We also go live every Wednesday with no pun intended. That is our flagship show. This week, we do our annual Intro to Dynasty. So we're just bringing Dynasty at you guys from every single angle. Our guests are Casey Kasem and Iowa Mike from 4D Chess and why am I forgetting the damn name of his his own podcast? But anyway, Iowa Mike, make sure you're following it. Josh will clean us up in the chat there. And then every Sunday we have the Dynasty After Party with Joel and Michael Sicoli. Basically, we got you covered from every single angle here at Club Fantasy. We appreciate you guys tuning in. We appreciate everybody who drafted with us. Always remember, defense wins championships, offense wins fantasy football, and practice makes perfect. We will see you guys at the next